going to go ahead and get started. There'll be some others who continue to trickle in as we get going. Good morning. Welcome to Laredo Trade Trends 2020 Trade Update. We're glad you're here this morning. We have a nice panel of speakers for you this morning as we look into how Laredo's doing. I'm Ken Roberts, the president of World City. Also speaking today will be Doug Bañez. He's the founder and managing director of Hubpoint Strategic Advisors, and Teclo Garcia, the economic development director for the city of Laredo. Let me tell you just a little bit about myself. I'm the president of World City. I'm a contributor to Forbes.com. I write 5 columns a week about export-import trade. I'm a member of the Federal Reserve's Trade and Transportation Advisory Board now at the end of my 2nd term. Our company, World City, we analyze U.S. Census Bureau data at TradeNumbers.com, uploading about 10 million data sets every month. And we've published TradeNumbers products for more than 20 markets around the country, including, of course, in Laredo, where we've been publishing annually for 10, 11 years now. Each week, we release Trade Matters videos where I talk about topics involving trade, and I speak around the country to Fortune 500 companies, national, local trade organizations, and so forth. But we've got a surprise for you today, a wonderful surprise. Mayor Pete Saenz will be making a few comments here for us before we get going, so I'm going to turn it over to the mayor and let him welcome you all.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Greetings to Ken Roberts and Doug Bañez, and of course our Teclo Garcia from Laredo. It's a pleasure being here with you, and it's more of a pleasure too because we do have the private sector listening in. And buenos dias. In this webinar, we'll be hearing from these experts that I just named, and of course also assessing the impact, the economic impact that the coronavirus has had on the local economy here, more so the turmoil that it's caused throughout, but more so Port Laredo, both export and import trade. As you know, and if you don't know, Laredo is the largest inland port, and until pre-pandemic, we were the 2nd largest overall port in the U.S. Yeah, even in the past year, and hope Mr. Roberts can confirm this, which I hope he will, we were temporarily the #1 overall port in the country. Daily, you'll hear, and I can reiterate, we've got about 17,000 trucks, about 25 trains and several cargo planes that land and depart from our airport, thus making Port Laredo an international hub for trade and commerce. Port Laredo always strives toward being more cost competitive and efficient in growing trade by working closely with the people that make us who we are, the stakeholders, private and public, on both sides of the border. Mexico contributes, to our success and vice versa. And I have to remind you that we do have the dual customs inspectors on the U.S. side, obviously from U.S. customs inspectors and Mexican customs inspectors at our commercial bridges, the rail bridge, and the airport. So with that, I leave you with the experts, and let's enjoy the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Mayor Saenz, for that warm introduction. We're all glad you're here. This event would not have been possible without the support of the City of Laredo, the World Trade Bridge, Laredo International Airport, and IBC Bank. They make it possible. We also relied on some wonderful supporting sponsors as well, some partners, Laredo Chamber of Commerce, Laredo Economic Development Corporation, and Laredo Motor Carriers Association. And I would be remiss if I did not mention right before I go to this on question slide that the 27th annual, I hope I got that right, 27th annual Laredo Manufacturers Symposium will be in November, so be looking in your email boxes for that. It's a great event. As the mayor was talking about, the pandemic has changed our lives a lot, and so this one will not be the big in-person event it's been for all these years, but it'll still be a fantastic event, and it's an important event for the community, so be on the lookout for that, and I hope you'll enjoy that as well. So let's talk about the questions. If you have questions, you can ask your questions at any time in the Q&A box there. We'll plan to try to answer most of those questions at the end after we've gone through the presentation, but please, as you have them, feel free to enter those questions in. So as most of you know, as many of you know, you've seen a copy of Port Laredo or Laredo Trade Numbers over the years. let me make a quick point about the difference between Port Laredo and Laredo, in case you don't know. I think most of you know by now. Port Laredo refers specifically to the bridges in and around Laredo. Laredo trade numbers, when we talk about Laredo Customs District, that's a much bigger area. That goes all the way from Brownsville to Del Rio and Eagle Pass, all the way that way. So it's a big swath of territory. So as the mayor was saying, Port Laredo, just the bridges in and around Port Laredo, around Laredo, have been the busiest entry point and exit point for trade in the United States a couple of times in the last couple of years, ahead of the Port of Los Angeles. And the Port of Los Angeles has been #1 for decades. So it's been quite an achievement for Port Laredo as it has grown. So the publication this year is newly redesigned. Those of you who've seen it in the past would recognize that immediately. We've been able to using data visualization techniques, get a lot more information in there. The publications should be available maybe at the Chamber of Commerce, perhaps, or at the bridge or the airport, so forth. But you can also go to ustradenumbers.com and download a PDF at no cost, or for a small fee, we'll send you a copy. But you can probably get one free in the community. Port Laredo's total trade for 2019 was $231.58 billion. Inside the publication, you can see the graphics I'm talking about. So we're really using data visualization techniques to really tell the story. The U.S. map there shows the top 20 U.S. airports, seaports, and border crossings. Port Laredo finished second behind the Port of Los Angeles for 2019. Again, really impressive that Laredo can do so. And by the way, I should mention that it is really disappointing to me that I can't be there in Laredo with all of you. I enjoy my trips to Laredo so much. Laredo always treats me very, very well. But as we all know these days, we're not traveling quite like we were. So we're glad that I'm glad that I can, if not be with you in person, we can be with you in this fashion. So that's how the publication looks. Let's jump into the trade overview because we got a lot to try to cover in a very short time. So first, let's look at U.S. trade. Okay, to give you the context. Okay, this data is going to be through June. The July data was just released this morning. I've got some of those numbers that I can try to sneak in here, but to get a presentation in the form that is attractive, like you see it here, we didn't have time to pull all that together. But so through June, U.S. trade was down 14.23% year to date. And then if you look at the bottom half of that chart, it was down 17.47% just for the month of June. So I should tell you two things about that. First of all, notice all the red triangles there. You see, red triangles means down, green triangle means up or increase. So the difference, let's talk about the difference between those two numbers, 14.23%, which is the year-to-date decline, and 17.47, which is just the month of June. What's a little bit distressing about that is that the monthly figure is still increasing faster than the year-to-date figure. That's not a great sign, but it is what it is. The second thing is, if you look at those green arrows, the U.S. deficit increased both year-to-date and the month of June because exports are falling faster than imports, okay? Let's look at now Port Laredo itself, okay? And again, the same format here. Top half is year-to-date through June. Bottom half is comparing June of 2020 to June of 2019. So we're not comparing it to May of 2020, but to June of 2019. So look at those two. Again, you see a lot of negative, a lot of red arrows pointing down. It's not surprising, all over the country at airports, seaports, border crossings all over the country. We're doing webinars like these, and we'll do one later this afternoon for FAR. We did one a couple of weeks ago for the Brownsville folks. We'll be in Eagle Pass next week. We'll be in Savannah. We've done Port Everglades near where I live in Miami. We've done Port Miami and MIA. We're going to Savannah, if I didn't mention that already. Philadelphia is coming up. So we're seeing the same story everywhere. You're not alone in this, and it's no surprise. But here what you see is the decline for Port Laredo year to date was 22.55%. That's the second number down from the top. And then if you look at the bottom half there, it's down 18.64%. So it's reversed, okay? It's reversed, and that's a good sign. That means that Port Laredo's trade decline is decreasing faster than it was. And part of that is because May, for most parts of the country, I'm trying to look and see what the decrease, and the decrease year to date for Port Laredo is going to be down, in July will be down to 20%, and the monthly was down only 10%. So the numbers are getting better for Laredo. So Port Laredo trade, while down from June 2019, actually increased 76.50% from May of 2020. So again, May was a really tough month. June, much, much better. In fact, one of my Forbes columns, I mentioned that Port Laredo is one of the fastest growing trade ports in the country. We'll go to the next slide here. So let's talk about, I mentioned the deficits and trade deficits. And deficits are exports minus imports. The balance of trade is something I like to talk about because I think it's equally important. And that shows you the ratio of exports to imports. So the US balance of trade, for every dollar of trade, 63 cents is an import, 37 cents an export. That was for the month of June. The reason I want to point this out is because historically, going back probably 15 to 20 years, it's always bounced around 40%, okay? So the balance of trade, though it changes minimally, is more tilted toward imports than at any time in a decade, okay? Let's look at Port Laredo. Port Laredo, 64% imports, 36% exports. So it's slightly less balanced than the national average, but right in line. And again, it's distorted a little bit more than it is historically. It's usually a little bit more tilted toward exports. Let's talk about Mexico. Okay, so first let's look at US trade, and let's look at where Mexico stands. So as a number of you probably know, Mexico was the #1 US trade partner in 2019. That's the first time that's ever happened. For most of the last 2 to 3 decades, as long as I've been looking at this data, it's been Canada. In 2016, China became #1, not because China's trade increased so much, but because Canada's dropped. Canada's dropped because the price of oil went down. And although many of us believe that we get a lot of our oil from the Middle East, most of our imported oil actually comes from Canada. So for the first time ever in 2019, Mexico's #1, Canada's #2, China's #3. If you look at those percentages, 15, 15, and 13, you can see how close they are. Just those 3 trade partners account for, 43% of all US trade. Let's look at year to date. What happened? Canada is #1, Mexico's 2, China is 3. So, and again, look at those percentages, 14, 14, 13. So it's still very, very close. June, who's #1? China. China's back on top in the month of June, and I've looked at the July figures, and China is still on top in the month of July. So if you're the kind of person who likes to make the friendly wager now and again, I would say this is going to be a tough one to call who's going to end up as the #1 trade partner for the year. It's going to be, I think, quite close. What's going on? There's been a great deal of disruption in U.S. trade. You've got the U.S.-China trade war, which has been going on for, what are we talking about, 2.5 years or so. We've got the pandemic that we're all very aware of, and then the economic fallout that has resulted from that. So let's look at Mexico's share of Port Laredo trade. 98% for 2019, 98% year to date, 98% for the month of June, and I can tell you now it did not change for July. That's pretty straightforward, pretty solid, doesn't really change much. Let's now look at let's flip that. Let's look at how important is Port Laredo for US-Mexico trade. And I think many of you in the room understand this and appreciate this, but the dominant entryway and exit point for US trade with Mexico is in Laredo, okay? 37% in 2019, 38% year to date, and up to 42% so far this year. So what you're seeing happen, even as the trade declines, you're seeing the market share increase, okay? So what that will tell you is that other of these border crossings and so forth are feeling the pain a little bit more than Port Laredo. Port Laredo's domination of US-Mexico trade is clear and consistent over time, as you can see. Okay, now we're going to get into these specific exports and imports. So let me explain what I'm going to do here. It's interesting. What I did, I start with the exports, and what I did is I looked back at June of 2019, and I said, what were the top 5 exports that went through Port Laredo, okay? And as I looked at those 5 exports, I said, how did they perform in 2020? I think we got a little bit of a lag on the screen here. There you go. So here, these were the top 5 exports in June of 2019, but here's how they performed in June of 2020. And it's not surprising, you're going to see some big decreases. Any of you who are involved in the automotive industry in any way, I think you are seeing some of this. So you can see the changes here. Motor vehicle parts, number one, down 36, going on 37%. Diesel engines more than 32%. Gasoline and other fuels down about just under 11%. Catalytic converters took a significant hit, down almost 44%. And engine parts down slightly, 1.87%. If you look at those five, you can see that three of them are above 30% decreases. If overall Port Laredo exports fell 26.03%. In June, the U.S. average was 23.81%, so about the same. Let's spring forward to June of 2020, and here's the top five now. And what you notice, there's not a lot of change. Catalytic converters have dropped out of the top 50, but motor vehicle parts still number one. Diesel engines there, number two. Gasoline and other fuels, number three. Computers have jumped in and are now number four with a big increase, and engine parts are still number five. What that tells you is even with those big decreases in those top three exports, they are so dominant, even with those big decreases, they can't be knocked out of their top rankings. They're that important to Port Laredo's trade. I should mention, by the way, all the statistics I'm talking about today are in dollar figures, in case any of you are concerned about tonnage or something like that. So let's move on to imports. So these were the top imports as of June 2019, and here's what happened to them when compared to in June of 2020 when compared to that year ago time. Motor vehicle parts also on the import side down 16.89%. Motor vehicles down almost 33% in 1 month. Tractors, and by the way, with tractors we are talking about not the kind you pull behind you on the farm, but the kind that you use to pull a big container of imports or exports. These are the rigs primarily. I mean, not exclusively, primarily that's what they are. They're down 44, almost about 44.5%. Commercial vehicles down 10.22%, and computers off slightly, 3.69%. Overall, Port Laredo imports fell 13.77% in June. The average, and again, as you saw on the export side, here's the same thing on the import side, sort of in line. The U.S. average was 13.24%. So Laredo is doing about like the country is doing on both the export and import side. So let's look at June of 2020. Here's the top five now. You see some reshuffling, but you see the same products. Those computers have moved up, tractors dropped down. So those are the same things. By the way, the reason those percentages are the same because we're still looking at the percentage change between June of 2020 to June of 2019. We're just looking at have any of the exports or imports moved in and out of that ranking. So Port Laredo imports increased 82.42% when compared to May of 2020. You saw the same big increase on the import side. So when compared just to the previous month, a big increase because May was a tough month both in Port Laredo and at airports, seaports, and border crossings around the country. U.S. imports increased 9.64% in that time, so a big difference there. Okay, so that concludes my presentation. I'm going to now introduce you to Doug Bañez. He's the founder and managing director of Hubpoint Strategic Advisors. It's a North Carolina-based consultancy specialized in the aviation, transportation, and logistics sectors. He specializes in long-term demand forecasting, air cargo market assessments, and passenger air cargo service development strategies. Serves as a senior member of ACINA's Air Cargo Committee, as well as a chair of the Transportation Research Board's Air Cargo Subcommittee. He has a Bachelor of Arts in Business and Economics from Lafayette College and a Master of Business Administration with dual concentrations in Transportation, Logistics, and Marketing from the University of Maryland, College Park. I should mention that, as I believe many of you know, the vast bulk of the trade that occurs in and around Port Laredo is going to be either on truck or rail. But the role of the airport is going to continue to grow and become more and more important. I think you will really see the need to have a growing and vibrant airport. I'm going to turn over to Doug and let him tell you all about that. Doug, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Ken. I appreciate the introduction, and I couldn't have said it better in terms of the importance of air cargo and the role it plays in air trade, in overall trade. First, that was a great overview of the trends at Port Laredo, and as you mentioned, I'm going to take the next few minutes to talk about trade, but with an air freight and air cargo spin. As you mentioned, it's a small component of overall trade, but we certainly see and recognize that in any region, the air freight component is a invaluable component of the overall freight transportation portfolio. And especially when it comes to high value and low weight goods, but also urgent shipments that require the speed of air. We're currently doing some work with the Laredo International Airport, so we've gotten some good understanding of the market. And in the next few slides, we'll go through those. I think with that, we'll turn to the slides. So just first couple slides, just want to I'm not going to go through every one of these points, but just want to point out some of the important characteristics of the airport, but also of the Laredo region as it relates to air cargo. And at the very top of the list, just like with on the surface side, it's the geographic positioning and location of the airport that's important. And you might think, well, why is that important? An airplane can go anywhere and even deeper into the U.S. to maybe the ultimate demand point. But it is that interaction between the surface components and modes and air that means something. We always say that anything that comes off of an airplane got there originally by truck. So the interaction between the trucks and the airplanes is an important component with all the activity around the border and coming off of the bridges. And there's also with the charter aircraft operators at Laredo, there is a staging component where they're staging aircraft and crews in the area so that they're ready at a moment's notice to move goods across the border, and particularly in this case to the interior or to and from the interior portions of Mexico. So air and the location of the airport are important. And just a couple others, the 24/7 customs capabilities at the airport, available when shippers and carriers need them and are convenient for them versus when the airport is available. And a dual inspection program, the mayor mentioned that as well. That's available at the airport where there are actually U.S. Customs officers working side by side with Mexican customs officers to clear southbound freight and make that a much more efficient process. So we'll move on to the next slide and talk a little bit about the Laredo region from a broader sense. And I think it's not a surprise to anyone that the superior, what we call logistics DNA of the region is extremely valuable with the presence of professionals like customs brokers, freight forwarders, trucking companies, all those institutional knowledge that comes with those that type of infrastructure is helpful on the air side as well as the surface side, and not to be ignored at all, and is evident with the presence of Mayor Saenz on this call, as well as Teclo Garcia, who will speak after me. The importance of the city of Laredo, the economic development groups, and some of the other stakeholders in the area really lends support and shows the importance of freight movement in the area, and that extends to air as well. So we'll move on to the next slide where we get into some of the trade components like Ken was talking about, but again, focused on air. And on this slide, I think the main point obviously is that Laredo ranks 5th amongst all U.S. airports in terms of U.S.-Mexico air trade. And I think the important point beyond the ranking, which is impressive, being 5th amongst all, is looking at the types of airports that we are competing with. You see airports like LA, Chicago O'Hare, New York JFK, and then the integrator or the FedEx and UPS type hubs. We're right there with them, and I think we'll use a boxing analogy and say that Laredo really fights above its weight class and succeeds. So I mean, these are some of the largest airports for cargo in the world, not just the United States, and Laredo is holding its own, and that's not an anomaly. It's something that's been sustained over many years. The next slide gets really into some of the components. Again, I'm going to tell you something that you already know, which is that auto parts and the automotive industry are well represented on the air side as well as overall trade in the Laredo region. And interesting, so 44% is represented by air parts at the airport. today. But interestingly, while industrial machinery and electric machinery, the second and third rank components of cargo at the airport, are not coded as auto parts, our sense for sure is that things like wire harnesses, LEDs, integrated circuit boards, those types of things that are parts of those other commodity codes are more than likely related to the auto industry as well. So I would say, you know, 44% is probably a conservative estimate of the representation of automotive goods at Laredo International Airport today. So then moving on to the next slide, while we love automotive and we want to grow that, there are downsides to being so concentrated in the one sector. And that leads to what you're seeing on this chart, and I'll explain it, but really heavy peaks and heavy troughs that really correspond with the overall auto industry. So in the red line, you'll see that's the total US auto parts shipments internationally, and that's with all geographies over time. And then in the blue line, it's the Laredo International Airport's total cargo. And you'll see that those things move, those two components move very much in sync directionally, if not in terms of the actual amplitude. You know, in the plus years for auto parts, Laredo is up. In the down years for overall auto parts, Laredo is down. And the idea that what we're looking at with the Laredo International Airport is to figure ways to diversify. And I think any business that's seeing this kind of pattern would say, let's diversify not only in industry, but likely geography as well. And the dotted line there is overall US international trade, not just auto parts, but to all countries and to and from all countries and through all industries. And you see that is a much more level type of trend over time. And that's what we'd like to do is kind of smooth out these peaks and troughs, but also help grow the overall activity at the airport, starting with automotive as the base and building on top of that. So if we move on to the next slide, this really gets into that diversification strategy. And one of those elements that we would want to look at further is e-commerce. I don't need to tell anybody about the growth of e-commerce. We're all doing shopping online, and that will only continue, but it's happening around the world and obviously in Mexico as well. So that's what this chart shows. There's been a expected 30% growth, and notably this work was done prior to the COVID, when we've all seen just an increasing use of e-commerce. So we think these numbers will only get larger over time as some of that new data gets in. But we think, again, back to the advantages of the airport and our experience with the US-Mexico trade, we think that Laredo can be well positioned to serve the e-commerce markets in Mexico, and that's something that we'll be looking at moving forward. The next slide, also looking forward, we do want to mention that Laredo is currently looking at developing on airport 7 distinct land parcels for development of a variety of purposes, but several of those are directly related to air cargo. This is an ongoing RFP. We were looking at some of the bids that have come in so far, and we're optimistic that with the involvement of the private sector in the development of these parcels, that the upside for air cargo and trade at the airport will only increase over time with their involvement and syncing up with the goals and objectives of not only the airport, but the overall Laredo community. So I think with that, I'll turn it back to you, Ken, and then move on to Teclo.
Okay, Doug, thank you very much for that. I think you told the story well, and just the diversification piece is great, and just the role that the airport plays in that Mexico trade is, I think, is impressive and will continue to become more impressive. For our final speaker today, we have Teclo Garcia. Many of you know him. He's the economic development for the city of Laredo, North America's busiest land port, as he put in his resume here, as he proudly put in here. He's worked on pacts with firms that brought millions of dollars into investment and hundreds of jobs to Laredo. He is an award-winning journalist in Texas and Arizona. He served as Director of Government Affairs for the City of McAllen and Director of External Relations for Missions EDC. He's a 6-year veteran of the U.S. Air Force, serving overseas during Desert Storm, and we appreciate that service. And he's a proud graduate of the Texas State University in San Marcos. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Teclo.
Proudest moments, I was the editor-in-chief of the Brownsville Herald. So I also enjoyed that job, also on the border. Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Doug, and Mayor Saenz for your wise words and your presentation. I appreciate it. I'm ready to start, Ken, wherever you'd like.
So let's just jump in. What do you see? What's going on now with the in the economic development work for Laredo, and where are you putting your priorities?
Right. No, great starter. Ken, let me just say that right now, Laredo has been able to weather this pandemic fairly well. I mean, that's not to say that there aren't businesses and the private sector that are hurting here in Laredo. They certainly are, but we've been able to do better than most. In fact, speaking of trade, through the first 6 months of 2020, our trade is down 22%, according to your charts there on your website. However, there are some silver linings in those numbers. One is, and I don't wish anything bad on our friends in the Valley and in El Paso, but El Paso's trade traffic was down 50%, and there's others who have done worse than we have. We've been able to weather this storm, I think, fairly well, and we're up on produce. We're up in computers and electronics. So there's signs of life inside that trade. What we've been focusing on the last year since I've been here is just trying to rearrange and refocus our priorities in terms of economic development. And one of those is, and I hate to say this, Ken, but low-hanging fruit was produce, right? And no pun intended there. The produce industry is growing very rapidly. Investment in Mexico, consumer demand across the country, our eating habits have reflected that. And in the last 8 months, we've had 4 fairly large commitments to Laredo in terms of produce distribution centers, and there's no mistaking that by you looking at Mission Produce, who's a California company who's invested about $50 million into a distribution, and they call it manufacturing facility and it's going to be dedicated to avocados. And then there's Sunset Produce, which we were able to retain 100 jobs and then add 140 more. Mission Produce is doing a minimum to start with of 75 jobs. We've got another Canadian company that just located here and I don't have the jobs number there. And so what we're trying to do is attack some of that lower hanging fruit, be strategic about it, and create jobs. And one other thing that I'd like to mention here in recruiting these jobs and investments, there's about close to $100 million right there of investment, and about a third of that is foreign direct investment from Canada. But these jobs that we're getting for these, we are pushing the envelope in terms of what the private sector would offer at these sort of what people have always thought of as low-level jobs, and paying $10 an hour or so forth. I know the mayor has made an initiative to try to address these things and address poverty in Laredo. So we've been pushing for these employers to pay $13, $14, and $15 an hour, and they've been very agreeable to do that for our local residents. So we're very proud to have these companies here, and we're very proud to partner with them on this job creation.
Great. And so one thing I should note is that the background behind you see all those trucks there. I know when I get to Laredo, I'm just always so impressed at just the constant flow of trucks across the border. And one of the things I'm curious to see how it plays out. Oh, and by the way, I should mention that both your airport director, Jeff Miller, and your bridge director, Yvette Lamont, are probably in the audience on the call. So, and as I mentioned in the chat, if you have questions, feel free to put them in there. One thing that, one of the questions that did come out so far, and either Teclo, you can probably answer this, or if Doug could possibly jump in as well. Somebody asked, how do we get Fortune 500 companies like Amazon to Laredo?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I have an answer for you, Ken. Amazon's already here. They're working in a nondescript warehouse. They're not known for their public relations and marketing outside of their commercials on TV. But yeah, Amazon's here and they're advertising for jobs. They're hiring, and we've had a lot of other companies hiring. In fact, there are about 24 Fortune 1000 companies here in Laredo with a significant presence. About 12 of those are Fortune 500 companies, like UPS, like FedEx, like Union Pacific, and KC Southern, and XPO, and on after that. So yeah, we have a significant presence of national and international companies here in Laredo that are doing a great job of expanding, of hiring people, of investing. I mean, FedEx's new freight center, which is, according to FedEx, a gateway to Mexico center, which means all their freight, 150 pounds or more freight gets marshaled in and siphoned to Laredo and then to the interior of Mexico. They use no other ports, land ports for that, except maybe some near stuff in California, but it is really going through here. So that's a 150,000 square foot facility and about a $25 million investment, and it's creating a lot of new jobs. There's a lot of cities around the state, especially that are really crowing about how they've gotten an Amazon, fulfillment center. Well, really, I mean, this is just like that. I mean, we've got a huge FedEx fulfillment center right here, and we're happy about those kind of investments that are creating jobs. One thing I did mention earlier, Kent, that I really want to make a point of is that I've been trying to get out there and tell Laredo's story quite a bit, whether it's online or in person, and that's a lot of public relations. But the thing is about Laredo is that we have to control our narrative. We have to tell our story. We can't let the rest of the state or the country control Laredo's story. And our story is one of success, of one of trade, of being North America's largest land port. So we have to get that out there, and that in turn will create investment opportunities.
Where I live, Amazon plays it the same way. We have at least 1 or 2 distribution centers here, and they have close to zero public presence. The Economic Development Organization in Miami has tried to get them engaged, but they're very quiet, and it's just the way it is. And I will say this also, you just mentioned controlling the Laredo story. I've been doing these publications around the country for 10, 15, going on 20 years. And in the early days, I would get asked, Laredo? And now I don't get asked anymore. So Laredo's story is getting out there. People who are in the trade community are very aware of Laredo. And I would say, and by the way, if any of you has any questions, now it's the time to chime in the last few minutes of the webinar, because we'll wrap up here in the next few minutes. One of the things that's really impressive about Laredo for its future is, as you see companies deciding to diversify their manufacturing base, and by that I mean maybe shift away from China somewhat. Certainly they're going to shift to Vietnam and Cambodia and to Pakistan and so forth. But I think what else will also happen is they will look to Mexico as an opportunity as well. And I think you'll see companies coming in, Chinese companies coming into Mexico to avoid any kind of tariffs and duties. And in terms of trade through Laredo, that can only be good news. Let me see.
That's part of our strategy, Ken. In fact, Mexico is very aggressively courting China and Japan for more investment and manufacturing to be located there, and that only can be a plus for us. In addition, we're also trying to be aggressive. A lot of people don't know that I mean, we've reached out to an Asian auto manufacturer because they're going to put their headquarters in the DFW area, but they've announced that they're going to put their manufacturing in northern Mexico and they want to be near the border. So those are opportunities for us, and we're looking at all those and trying to chase those down.
Yeah, and I would tell you, by the way, Aaliyah Guevara we must have been thinking along the same lines, because her question, the question entered into the queue there is almost identical to what I was sort of talking about, is how is Laredo taking advantage of that opportunity? And I would say with regard to DFW does a lot of Asian trade. If you look at its footprint in terms of how it trades with the world, it doesn't really look like Houston at all. It looks like LAX. The top trade partners are largely Asian partners, and they bring stuff in from South Korea to some extent, China to some extent, Asian partners. So there is a significant opportunity there as well for products that might then move up through Mexico, through Laredo into Dallas, and then fly back to Asia. There's all sorts of ways this could play out.
Right. We've reached out to private developers and the state of Tamaulipas to work with them and try to get this on the agenda, between us as we cooperate to bring development in. So we're working it from all angles as best we can.
Yeah. So Steve Perez has a question in there. What are the stats on air cargo Laredo? I don't know if Doug wants to jump in. I can tell you that I haven't looked at it closely in a while, but it is, it's relatively small. It's not insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but when you look at how much trade moves via truck and rail, it's just, it is relatively small, but I believe, I'm going from recollection, I believe it's less than 10%, far less than 10%, but I don't have that number handy, and I apologize for that. Doug, did you have anything you want to say on that?
Right, yeah, Ken, you're right. I mean, it tends to be in the low single digits when you compare weight, in particular weight of air to other trade. And usually it's in the 2 to 5% for most markets, but the value is what we typically say it's about 2% of global weight, but it represents about 30% of the value. So it's that value component that's particularly important.
Yeah, yeah. Any other questions for us today? Have I missed anybody here? Let's start with customers.
Yeah, Ken, I guess there was the one question related to e-commerce, and I guess Amazon, it's synonymous with Amazon, but obviously there are other e-commerce providers. And I guess just from an air side, I would just add that I think in terms of promoting Laredo to e-commerce providers, the ease of entry, that dual inspection program that I spoke about, having things cleared on the US side so that when they get to Mexico, they're immediately able to disperse from the airport and into consumers' hands. I think that is a critical component that we'll be looking to promote. But also on the air side, you're always looking for two-way flows, and typically like your balance of trade, it tends to be skewed to one side. And I think with that reshoring that you were mentioning, and Teclo was talking about, China and others coming to Mexico and North America in general, I think what you could see there is an e-commerce provider launching from Laredo, going into Mexico to supply the consumer base, but on the way back, bringing back the goods that then supply their warehouses for further distribution. So I think that could work out nicely, and then something that we're certainly going to investigate over time.
Okay. And Joe Kiley, and we'll wrap up here in a second. Joe Kiley's asking, as trade through the Port of Laredo continues to grow, how can future congestion and wait times at the border and beyond be addressed? So I can tell you that, and I can't answer that specifically, but I can tell you I travel around the country, and the number one complaint in every city I go to, I can't think of an exception, is traffic. That was before, it's not now. So it is an issue, I guess, wherever you go, but I don't know if Teclo, if you have any thoughts on traffic, congestion, anything there?
Well, that's always a concern for us. However, we're still handling a lot of trade, and I need to take this opportunity to thank our federal partners. I mean, none of this trade could be possible without the ardent and constant work that our friends at Customs and Border Protection do every day, day in and day out. So we couldn't handle 12,000 to 16,000 trucks a day and up to 30 trains a day without their help. So yeah, that's always a concern for us, but it also shows the magnitude of work that these guys do.
And Teclo, our good friend Jerry Schwebel from IBC says is requested that you talk about Kansas City Southern and share any figures you might have on the rail traffic numbers and longer trains, rail infrastructure.
Sure. In fact, I just got through a briefing with Kansas City Southern. I want to reveal everything they've told me, but one thing that Kansas City Southern, who operates our only rail bridge in Laredo, they've recently acquired a presidential permit to build another span over the river, which is going to be a huge boon for us. And it's going to be able to make those 30 trains more manageable across two spans instead of just one. And then maybe longer term, that will allow for more growth as well. Remember last year, a couple of months in 2019, I think, Mexico surpassed Japan in auto imports to the U.S. So and there's several new plants that have recently opened in Mexico. So that's a huge component of our trade. Our imports are brand new, whole cars. One other thing to mention, just real quick, Ken, if I have just a second, is to say that our produce trade is up. It imports. Now, overall, produce is only a small portion of Laredo's trade, maybe about 4% or something like that. But we're on a clip, even through this pandemic, this year to surpass last year's numbers of about 3.8 billion. And if things hold steady and we get into the avocado season later this year, I mean, we could easily surpass 4.0 or maybe even 4.2 or 4.3 billion in produce imports, mainly powered by the avocado.
Yeah, no, the perishable trade, the numbers don't always stack up because you're looking at high value items like motor vehicle parts and so forth. But the perishable trade is critical, not only in Laredo, because, and this is the bigger picture of that Laredo needs to keep in mind, is because there's a question about, there's some discussion in the chat area about, Laredo's diversification and so forth. Laredo's role in the economy continues to be that it not only trade not only supports Laredo, but it's critical for the state of Texas and critical for the nation. You can't move that much trade through one place and not be critical to the nation's health. There are some good questions about what border communities in particular need to do for their communities because of all this trade. But Laredo, not as much, but some of the other border crossings are towns built by NAFTA, largely. And now we didn't even talk about USMCA, it didn't come up today, but as you see Mexico trade, when it rebounds, when Laredo's trade rebounds, you'll see the critical role it plays, and that'll be the task for people like Teclo and the city's leadership. How do we make sure that the city itself continues to benefit from trade, and if it's not benefiting enough, what do we need to do to make sure that it does, right?
It really is incredible, Ken. I mean, our commercial construction continues almost unabated through the pandemic. I mean, we have year to date, through July, I believe, or maybe it's June, I can't remember. We've done over $300 billion worth in commercial construction, which is maybe 20-25% more than last year. Our trade industry, the private sector, continues to invest and produce in Laredo, and we're just trying to keep up with it and make Laredo conducive to private sector investment.
Yep. So guys, we've essentially taken up our time. There's quite a bit still going on in the chat feature, which is great. And there's a question or two we probably haven't quite gotten to, but I don't want to keep you longer than we promised. One of the good signs is I'm able to sort of watch the attendance, and the attendance level really hasn't dropped during the entire presentation. That means that I've got to thank Doug Bañez for a great presentation and Teclo for also a great presentation. It really went well. I should also say that I remind you that if you want to see U.S. trade, if you want to see a copy of Laredo or Port Laredo trade numbers, by the way, this year we did 2. So this one is for Laredo, and it's our fold-out map, so a different format. As you can see, it unfolds. It unfolds, and it has, again, a lot of great data visualization in there, and those are available around town or also on our website. And again, we could not have done this terrific event without the support of our sponsors. The City of Laredo, the World Trade Bridge, Laredo International Airport, and IBC Bank, as well as our partners, Laredo Chamber of Commerce, Laredo Economic Development Corporation, and the Laredo Motor Carriers Association. I hope we're back again, in the near future, do another one of these. But in the meantime, you can stay in touch with us any number of ways. You can go to ustradenumbers.com, where we have a page updated every month, and we'll have the July date up within hopefully a couple of days, maybe tomorrow if we're lucky. And we're available on all sorts of social media as well. Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. You can actually pick up a phone and call us. And I can be reached by email at kroberts@worldcityweb. Thank you all very much for attending, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.